Thou wast transfigured on the mount, O Christ our God, revealing thy glory to thy disciples as far as they could bear it. Let thine everlasting light shine upon us sinners, through the prayers of the Theotokos, O giver of light, glory to thee.
Good evening, and Christ is risen, Christos Anesti. Welcome back to our live Bible study here in Florence, South Carolina. We were not together last week, as everyone who's watching knows. Last week was our Holy Week, so we were in church every night last week, but we did miss each other from the Bible study point of view anyway. And so I want to offer everyone a Paschal greeting and wish everyone a blessed resurrection. Christos Anesti, Christ is risen. And also, I have to apologize to our live viewers back home, as they say. 2 weeks ago at our last session, I had the wrong link on the internet. So people had to go to 3 different places before they could find the Bible study live last week. Everyone was able to find it after the fact because it was there. So I have to apologize to everyone who is watching live. But we're making lots of progress. Okay, as we continue this evening, first of all, I was supposed to get a new cup tonight, but it is raining cats and dogs here in Florence. And when it rains like that in Florence, people get a little delicate. You know, we have our hair to worry about and all these kinds of things. So I understand that the cup that I was supposed to get tonight is sitting in someone's car because they didn't want to get wet bringing all these things into the church. So I am forced to use a repeat cup again this week. The pickings are slim here in terms of my cup. So in honor of the rainy South Carolina night, I'm using my South Carolina cup tonight. So we have our South Carolina in honor of our rainy South Carolina night. And you know, when it rains here, it's kind of like when it snows up north. People just kind of stay home and not very many people get on the roads because our roads get very slippery here. I don't know, for some reason they don't like to drive in the rain. But we do have people here. I was worried that I might be by myself tonight in front of the camera. But most of our ornery people are here. Some of our ornery people stayed home tonight because they weren't feeling well. But most of our ornery people, yeah, you see, you're laughing because you know you're one of them. Okay. So here we are. Letting us know what he thinks of. Yeah, see, oh, you're safe because all your microphones are off. They can't hear you making fun of me right now. Okay. So here we are. We're in the book of Acts. Tonight is session 24. And we'll be reading from Acts chapter 10, verse 23, actually 23 and 24, all the way through 43. And we'll be following as our guide the homilies of St. John Chrysostom. And we will be reading from homily 23. And if you have the printed edition, we'll be reading on page 152. Now, exciting news for those of you, everyone here has copies of the book, but if you're looking for a copy of the homily book, you can go to the online store at myocn.net, click the buy button, and go to the OCN store, and under the favorites, you'll see copies of the homilies for sale, both an ebook version and an English translation. Not the same edition that I'm using here, so the pages won't be the same, but at least the text will be the same. So if you'd like a copy of the homilies of St. John Chrysostom on the book of Acts, and actually the book includes the book of Romans, go to myocn.net, click on the buy button, and with your purchase, you'll also be supporting the Orthodox Christian Network. You know, Amazon has that wonderful program where if you buy through these different buttons, at no extra cost, Amazon gives a donation to the charity. So the Orthodox Christian Network will get a donation every time someone buys a copy of the homilies. And so since we have so many fans across the world, hopefully we'll earn maybe $1 worth of commission for Orthodox Christian Network and have them purchase copies of the homilies of St. John Chrysostom. All right, one last thing. Daniel here from Paris, Tennessee says, Christos Anesti. Welcome back, Daniel. They've been our loyal fans there in Tennessee. And I have to say, before we get started, that the Orthodox Church this week, even though we are celebrating the joy of the resurrection, here in this part of the world, we had two tragic situations. We had two different churches basically burned to the ground this year, both on Easter. In Knoxville, Tennessee, 8 o'clock in the morning Easter Sunday. Now, they left maybe 3 o'clock in the morning after church services, and by 8 a.m. the church was on fire. They think it might be a total loss on the inside. And also St. George Greek Orthodox Church in Montreal, Canada. We have fans watching from Canada. Had a fire Monday night and has basically been completely gutted by fire. So here, just when we're supposed to be celebrating the joy of the resurrection, we have two churches that have been basically burned to be unusable. So our prayers are with the parishioners in Knoxville, Tennessee, and the Greek Orthodox community in Montreal, both of whom lost their churches in the middle of their celebration. So they don't know yet the fire. They'll be a while before they figure out what caused the fire. So please keep those communities in your prayers. If everyone's ready, let's go ahead and open with our prayer, and then we'll sing the Christ is risen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Shine within our hearts, loving Master, the pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our minds that we may comprehend the message of your gospel. Instill in us also reverence for your blessed commandments, so that having conquered sinful desires, we may pursue a spiritual life, thinking and doing all those things which are pleasing to you. For you, Christ our God, are the light of our souls and bodies, and to you we give glory, together with your Father, who was without beginning, and your all-holy, good, and life-creating Spirit, always, now, and forever, and to the ages of ages. Christ is risen from the dead, by death trampling down upon death, and to those in the tombs he has granted life. Christ is risen.
Truly he is risen.
All right, who wants to start us off? Chapter 10, verse 23, just to pick up where we were, to remind everyone where we were last time, was that Cornelius had sent for Peter, and it says here that Peter had left Joppa to go with the men that Cornelius had sent. So who wants to start us off reading chapter 10? Let's go ahead in verse 23 through 29. Turn your mics on. Who's going to read? Peter, you want to read? All right, turn it on and move it closer to yourself now. Good and close, even closer. There you go.
Verse 23.
Yeah.
Then he invited them in and lodged them. On the next day Peter went away with them, and some brethren from Joppa accompanied him. And the following day they entered Caesarea. Now Cornelius was waiting for them, and had called together his relatives and close friends. As Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him, and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, Stand up, I myself am also a man. And as he talked with him, he went in and found many who had come together. Then he said to them, You know how unlawful it is for a Jewish man to keep company with or go to one another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Therefore I came without objection as soon as I was sent for. I asked them, for what reason have you sent for me?
All right. So St. John Chrysostom begins his sermon with verse 23, even though it's the previous section. And he makes a wonderful point that St. Peter, if you look here, it says, he invited them in and lodged them. Everything begins with hospitality. Before he did anything, he invited the people in, and so St. Peter shares hospitality. He invites them for all. Remember, we talked about 2 weeks ago. There's a soldier there. There's people there. He had all logical reasons to be afraid. And what does he do? He shows hospitality. And so that's where Chrysostom begins, because this hospitality is this. The hospitality is that genuine love that St. Peter has for people. And so that's where he starts. Because we also have the centurion, Cornelius, not the centurion. By the way, there's a mistake there in the study guide, so please forgive me. Cornelius also does the same thing. He shows hospitality and friendship. Chrysostom goes so far as to say, listen to this, this is about Cornelius. This is the part of a friend. This is the part of a devout man, that where such blessings are concerned, he takes care that his near friends shall be made partakers of all. So here is Cornelius, faithful, pious, devout. He's actually waiting for St. Peter. He was so sure St. Peter was going to come, he's waiting for him. But he's not alone. He went and he gathered all of his friends so they could all be prepared and waiting for St. Peter to come and learn of this wonderful thing that was going to happen, this wonderful news they were going to get, this wonderful information, this message of hope they were going to get. And so Chrysostom points out what a wonderful friend that is, that he wants his close friends, near friends, to be partakers of all of those blessings that are coming from God. Okay? He doesn't hold anything to himself. He doesn't even wait to see what the message is. It's not like he says, well, let me hear the message first, and then if I like what I hear, I'll invite my friends. He was so sure it was going to be worth hearing that he had his friends there ready and waiting to greet St. Peter. And I think that's an important thing. So the other point that Chrysostom makes here is that St. Peter is constantly teaching by his actions. So St. Peter knocks on the door, he arrives there, and what does Cornelius do? He bows down in front of him and worships him. And immediately St. Peter lifts him up, right? And he says, stand up, I myself am also a man, right? So you imagine now Peter, the chief of the apostles, you know that he was shown some kind of deference. You know that he was shown some kind of honor when he was in the midst of the faithful. And yet here he is, he says, no, I'm just a man just like you. Get up. Don't bow down in front of me. So from the very beginning of the interaction, St. Peter is expressing this deep, profound humility to Cornelius and all of the friends and family who are watching. Okay? And so you have these two humble, pious, faithful friends gathering, and it's going to bear great fruit. It's going to bear great fruit. All right, who wants to read our next section, 30 through 33? Is there a microphone on? Who's going to read? All right, turn the mic on. 30 through 33.
So Cornelius said, 4 days ago I was fasting until this hour. And at the ninth hour I prayed in my house, and behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing, and said, Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, and your alms are remembered in the sight of God. Send therefore to Joppa and call Simon here, whose surname is Peter. He is lodging in the house of Simon, a tanner, by the sea. When he comes, he will speak to you. So I sent to you immediately, and you have done well to come. Now therefore we are all present before God to hear all the things commanded you by God.
All right. So there's a few things here we're going to cover. First, I always like to show some of these, bring your attention to some of these discrepancies in the translation. Well, there seems to be a difficulty here in this verse 30. Now, in this particular translation, it says, 4 days ago I was fasting until this hour. And at the ninth hour I prayed in my house, and behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing. According to St. John Chrysostom, he makes a specific point in his sermon to say that from his vantage point, this wasn't simply 4 days ago. Okay. And he goes on in the sermon and lays out the days of the journey and how many days they were in transit and how many days they had fellowship, etc. Chrysostom makes an interesting point here, and from his vantage point, Cornelius was talking about on the fourth day, which would have been Wednesday. And the reason this is important is because the apostles had commanded that the Christians fast on Wednesday and Friday. And so here is Cornelius, not yet a Christian, and yet from Chrysostom's vantage point, he was already fasting on Wednesday, on the fourth day of the week. Because in Greek, the days of the week are named for, besides Sunday being the Lord's Day, Saturday being the Sabbath, Friday is the day of preparation, but then Monday is the second day, Tuesday is the third day, Wednesday is the fourth day, Thursday is the fifth day. That's how it's named in Greek. And so Chrysostom says he's not talking about 4 days ago. He's talking about that on the fourth day, meaning on Wednesday, Cornelius was so pious and so dedicated to God that he had already established himself a prayer time and time dedicated to God, that he was going to fast and pray on Wednesday. Now, the evidence that Chrysostom brings forward there is that that was the custom of the Christians to pray and fast until the ninth hour. Okay? The ninth hour was 3 p.m., at which point they'd go into their evening prayers and things like that. So he's saying, this is why the angel came and said, the actual quotation, right? The angel says, well, this is way back earlier in chapter 10. Your prayers and your alms have come up as a memorial before God, right? Way back in verse 4. The angel says that. So Chrysostom says this is why the angel was sent, to honor that Cornelius had already been setting aside a time for prayer and fasting, even though he wasn't yet a Christian. Now, the various translation evidence suggests that the text says 4 days ago. So most Bibles will use the translation 4 days ago, not on the fourth day. But I think the reason I bring it here is this is one of those nuances, since we're not sola scriptura, and Chrysostom brings that beautiful thing forward, very conceivable, because you've got the nuances in the Greek grammar and that kind of thing. And so I would give some deference to St. John Chrysostom in terms of his interpretation of whether it was 4 days ago or on the fourth day. So this is Wednesday. The original vision was a Wednesday. So if it is a Wednesday and it is also 4 days ago, right? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So the beautiful coming together of both of those possibilities, that if in fact it was 4 days ago and it happened to be a Wednesday, then they're having their interaction on a Sunday, the Lord's Day. And there's a beautiful merging together there of those possibilities.
Was it true that it was an angel?
Yes, so it was an angel, and that's what Chrysostom points out. He says, look how humble Cornelius is. He doesn't even presume it's an angel. Right? And how many of us would be so proud that we were visited by an angel? Because we would want to use that as, what's the word I'm looking for? As justification. Look, an angel told me to do this. This is not just something I made up. An angel told me to do this. So our first inclination would be to invoke the angel's presence, not Cornelius. He doesn't worry about justification. He doesn't worry about boosting his reputation up at all. He just presumes it's a man dressed in white. That's how humble he is.
Well, it's not white, bright clothing.
Bright clothing, yeah, bright clothing. Chrysostom talks about it being white. Now, so this humility of Cornelius continues, specifically now in verse 33. He says, now therefore we are all present before God. So Cornelius presumes this whole interaction to be in the presence of God. This is a divine occurrence here happening, right? And then he even says, to hear all the things that all the things commanded you by God, right? So he considers this interaction between Peter and himself and all those looking on as divinely inspired. We'd say, Chrysostom uses the word providential a lot, that this is where God had really had his hand in the mix. Sometimes we talk about, God, how often does he put his finger in the mix and stir things around? This would be one of those moments where we really see God present. You've got the humility of Cornelius, you've got the piety of Cornelius, you've got the humble, friendly hospitality of Peter, and the willingness because of his vision, which we'll hear more about in a second, with the sheep and the animals and all that kind of thing. All of that coming together, very providential. We talked about that 2 weeks ago, so the whole world can come into the church. There's someone online right now who, of course, is not a Christian, and they're saying all sorts of things here about, I don't know why you believe in those crazy things. This person here, Priapus Christ, and I'm sorry, but I'm not going to respond to his direct comments to let him know that I see what he's writing. But that's the joy of the presence, right? Even those who are against the message can chime in. But since he chooses not to be respectful in his comments, I'm not going to actually entertain the discussion with him. But I wanted him to know that I can see that he's making comments there. All right, so there's this beautiful gathering there, which he says before God, and so he doesn't see it as a mere gathering of men. This is not a human mission here. This is a divine mission. So, who wants to read 33 to 43, the rest of this section? Peter, can you read for us?
Or you want 34 to 43?
34 to 43. Can you move a little closer to your mic, just a little bit closer?
Then Peter opened his mouth and said, in truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation whoever fears him and works righteously is accepted by him. the word which God sent to the children of Israel, preaching peace through Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all. That word you know, which was proclaimed throughout all Judea and began from Galilee after the baptism which John preached, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power, who went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. And we are witness of all things which he did both in the land of the Jews and in Jerusalem, whom they killed by hanging on a tree. Him God raised up on the third day and showed him openly, not to all the people, but to witness chosen before God by God, even to us who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. And he commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that he is who was ordained by God to be judge the living and the dead. To him all the prophets witness that through his name whoever believes in him will receive remission of sins.
What a beautiful teaching by Saint Peter here. So let's pull apart some of these pieces here. So right here at the very beginning, Peter opens his mouth and he immediately teaches that God shows no partiality, right? Everyone is welcome. Now he interprets this vision that he had, and so I want to pull apart some of those pieces. First of all, when he talks about clean and unclean, he's talking about those who are circumcised and those who are uncircumcised. This is, remember now, because there's presumably Jews present. And so he's on the one hand talking to Cornelius, and on the other he's speaking so that the rest of the onlookers, presumably some of them are Jewish, are also going to be benefited, and they're also going to embrace this message. So he first makes clear that the message he's giving is coming from God, and that there's no partiality, that all are welcome. Of course, St. Paul talks about the same thing, God showing no partiality. So Chrysostom says here, for if he did not overlook the Magi, nor the Ethiopian, nor the thief, nor the harlot, much more them that work righteousness and are willing, shall he in any wise not overlook. So, in other words, there's no one that God is not going to welcome into the church. And so, we talk about many times St. Paul as the apostle to the Gentiles, but St. Peter as the leader of the disciples, as the leader of the apostles. St. Peter's the one who receives the vision from God, saying, what God has made clean, don't call unclean. And so it's from the leadership of the apostles, they already set the framework. Everyone is welcome in the Church of Christ, whether you are circumcised or uncircumcised, whether you're a Greek, whether you're a Jew, whether you're an Egyptian, whether you're a Samaritan, whoever you are, you're welcome here in the church. And then he goes on, and remember now, this has been the process every time the apostles teach. What do they always return to? The whole story of Jesus Christ. And so St. Peter, beginning with verse 36, goes through the entire life of Christ into verse 41, including his resurrection. And that is that constant pattern, returning to why we're all here in the first place. God came, he became one of us, he dwelt among us, his baptism, his passion, his crucifixion, his burial, his death, and his glorious resurrection. Right? And St. Peter offers what we would all agree is the ultimate proof of his resurrection. Right? In verse 41, even to us who ate and drank with him after he arose from the dead, as total proof that he physically was resurrected. It wasn't just an apparition. It wasn't just a vision of Jesus, a ghost, so to speak. It was real flesh and blood. They ate and drank with him. The total proof that he had been raised from the dead. Okay, I want to take a minute here. We have a woman from Killian, Louisiana, Joyce Bennett. I just want to introduce everyone to Joyce Bennett. Hey, from Killian, Louisiana, I am a Protestant, and I watch you every week. Thank you for teaching so much that I didn't know. So, Joyce Bennett, thank you for chiming in. And you, because you have chosen to say hello, if you would go to my website, liveanewlifeinchrist.org, and leave a comment in the comment section there on the left side of the blog with your name and address, I would love to send you a beautiful handmade wooden cross necklace to say thank you for participating and watching our live Bible studies. We like to get comments, don't we? So let us continue. I just wanted to introduce everybody to Joyce Bennett, who's been watching every week. So this is her first time. 24 weeks, she finally said hello. See, 24 weeks, she finally said hello. So I got to tell you a story. A few years back, we have Francis Marion University, not too far away from here. And for the longest time, I haven't gone much this year because my schedule hasn't permitted it. I was going to campus every Friday afternoon, working on my sermon, working on Bible studies, just drinking a cup of coffee in the grill there on campus. One day, this happened a couple of years ago, one day a young woman comes up to me, and I'm dressed like this as a priest. She says, "Excuse me, can I ask you what you do here?" And I said, "I'm drinking coffee." Right, you know me, I'm always the basic answer. I'm drinking coffee. What do you mean? I'm like, "Well, I don't teach here, if that's what you mean." She says, "My friends and I have been watching you for 2 years. We wanted to come up and see who you were. You want to sit down and have a cup of coffee with us?" And we shared a cup of coffee every Friday for almost an entire year as a group. But it took 2 years before they were willing to come up and say hello. So Joyce, not so bad. It took you only 24 weeks to come say hello to us. So the next time you're in Florence, Joyce, come introduce yourself. Oh, look who else is on. Our friend Elise.
Oh, really?
Elise from Hartsville is on. So Elise, welcome. Everyone knows Elise, one of our parishioners. See, we're having lots of fun tonight. People all over the place are getting involved in our little Bible study tonight. All right, so where were we? We're back here. Now, so look at verse verse 38. How God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power, who went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. I bring that specifically out tonight because so many times when people suffer, we blame God. And Chrysostom makes the point, as does the way St. Peter is teaching here, that the suffering comes from the devil. It's the healing that comes from God. And so when we suffer, which we're all going to suffer, we may be suffering right now. When we suffer, St. Peter would remind us, St. John Chrysostom would remind us, that the suffering itself is from the devil. It's the healing that comes from God. God didn't come to make us suffer. Now, He allows us to suffer. We've talked about that many, many times, that there's blessings in the suffering, and that we grow closer to God in the suffering. We learn to hope in God in the suffering. But we cannot forget, and St. Peter says it very clearly, healing all who were oppressed by the devil. Right? God's job is the healer. But just like any sickness, sometimes it takes time to heal, and sometimes we're going to suffer a little bit in the therapy, so to speak, right? Sometimes the treatment can be a little painful. As a matter of fact, I've never had surgery, thank God. Knock on wood. But in the prayer before surgery, it talks about the wounding of the flesh as a real painful experience so that our souls may be healed. Right? So sometimes, even in the healing process, we might feel a little bit of that suffering, but we have to remember the suffering itself is given to us by the devil, and especially because we're trying to follow Christ. All right, so,
Father,
yes, ma'am.
when people go through treatment like, say, cancer,
Uh-huh.
and they suffer from chemo or radiation,
Right.
where does that stand?
What do you mean? In
other
this
words,
realm
in
of
this
what?
realm of suffering and healing.
Well, I would say very simply, it's because of the cancer that the suffering is there. Okay.
And the devil brought the cancer.
And that the cancer, that the cancer is, now we're not saying that, okay, that's a great, I think I know where you're going with this. I'm going to make a presumption here.
Right.
I think where you're going is the devil the cause of the suffering direct? In other words, or are we, in other words, some people say, because I sinned, I suffer. All right, so in the sense that we live in a fallen world, we're all going to suffer. Ultimately, what's the root of all of that? The devil. Right? It's the devil who tempts us. It's the devil who originally tempted Eve and who got to Adam. And so in that sense, cancer is a result of the fallen world, which is one of the ways that the devil holds us captive. Because if the devil can plant in our minds, God doesn't love you, he let you get cancer. That's how the devil's going to use that. I would never suggest that cancer is directly given to us by the devil. The devil can't do that. The devil cannot physically give us an ailment unless God allows him to, like he did to Job, right? So I'm not saying that necessarily, but that the ultimate cause of suffering is the devil's involvement in the world, in the cases of cancer and things like that, right?
Wouldn't that also,
Yep, can I use your microphone?
wouldn't that also somewhat apply to, when they were healing of the demons, or that Christ, healed people with demons? Wouldn't that in essence say that when the devil put the demons there?
Well, yeah, for those situations where there's true demonic possession, yes, that's the devil and his angels. I mean, it says they said his name was Legion because there were so many of them. Yes, those are the demons physically present in their bodies. Now, the point that St. Peter here is making, the only reason I'm bringing this out is because we tend to like to blame God for a lot of things. Why is God making me suffer? Why is God giving me this challenge? Why is God giving me this obstacle? God allows it, but God doesn't give the pain. I mean, occasionally there's stories where God has, but that's always for a particular purpose. The point I'm just trying to make in our desire to always be the center of attention. Why is God doing this to me? Those questions are the devil trying to get us to lose our hope in God. See how mad God is at you? God's causing you this, God's giving you that, God's giving you this. Well, St. Peter is saying that they're oppressed by the devil, and God's healing them. And sometimes the healing can be a little painful. Elise says, so we are not looking for a way to sanctify pain if we have to live with it? That's a good question. St. Paul is thankful for the thorn in his side. If I think that's what Elise is trying to say in terms of sanctifying pain. Yes, in that sense, the pain can be a blessing to us. And sometimes it's the pain or the suffering, any kind of suffering, whether it's physical pain or emotional struggle or whatever the case might be, all of that, if done from a proper spiritual vantage point, is going to draw us closer to God, because it's going to help us depend more upon God. The more we depend upon God, the closer we grow to Him. So in that sense, yes, pain can be sanctified. I would hesitate in answering Elisa's question. I don't want it to sound like pain is good, because some people take that to the other extreme, and then they create their own pain because they think there's good in pain. So I want to make sure we understand that as well. So look how Peter ends his dialogue here. Verse 43, to him all the prophets witness that through his name whoever believes in him will receive remission of sins. Even the prophets knew all this was going to take place. See, that's Peter's way again of making sure the Jews are part of this conversation, right? Any Gentile could care less what the prophets say, because the prophets are for the Jews. And so he's saying to those Jews who are watching, even the prophets knew about all this. Even the prophets spoke about all this. So he's trying to bring everyone together. It's okay, those of you who are Jewish, don't feel that I'm creating some kind of new teaching. Don't think that I'm creating a new gospel, that all of a sudden I'm reaching out on my own authority and welcoming in the Gentiles. Even the prophets spoke about how Jesus Christ would bring in the Gentiles. So this is where St. Peter is invoking the prophets to soothe maybe whatever frustrations. Well, where is this message coming from? He's got this new message. We don't trust what he's saying about. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of where St. Peter's going at it, and that's where Chrysostom helps us to understand. What time is it? Oh, it's 1:45. We're doing really good. All right. Any questions on that before we move on to our teaching tonight? All right. So for those watching online, we're going to move now to our weekly teaching, and today's topic is the Christian way of life. And so if you would like to chime in with some questions, feel free. I will do my best to work the questions in. I don't know who this person is, 1023 JCS, but we can learn from pain through the act of growing and healing. Absolutely. So this person, we can definitely grow through the pain and learn to depend upon God. Okay, so let's get our homilies in front of us. If you got the printed edition, page 152. Page 152 in the printed edition. So the topic tonight, the Christian way of life. I've identified, how many do I have here? 4 different topics that I want to bring your attention to. The first one, you have obtained forgiveness, don't waste it on sinful living. And that's part of why I think it's a great place to start. Go back to this idea where everyone is welcomed by God, right? He shows no partiality. Everyone's welcome into the church. Well, you can take that expression a bit too far and say that since everyone is welcome, there's no need to change my life. And that's not what the gospel says. The gospel talks about a life of repentance, right? So while we are all welcome, we are all expected to live a new life in our baptism. And that's where Chrysostom begins. So page 152 at the bottom of the first column, he says, all you that have received this forgiveness, all you to whom it has been vouchsafed to attain unto faith, learn, I beseech you, the greatness of the gift, and study not to be insolent to your benefactor. For we obtained forgiveness, not that we should become worse, but to make us far better and more excellent. Let none say that God is the cause of our evil doings, in that he did not punish nor take vengeance. So, what a beautiful what a beautiful point he's making here. That look, you've received this forgiveness from God. Don't now take that as license to just live however you want to live. You've been given the forgiveness to live better. Right? And he goes on, he says, don't think, I love this part, right? He says, let none say that God is the cause of our evil doings, in that he did not punish nor make vengeance. And he continues here, which is really kind of interesting. If, as it is said, a ruler having taken a murderer lets him go, say he's not judged to be the cause of the murder afterwards committed. In other words, you're not going to blame a judge and say the judge is guilty of that murder because the judge forgave the murderer the first time, right? No, the murderer is still the one guilty of the murder. So he says, don't accuse God because God is not judging us and because God is not punishing us. Don't accuse God of being the one who's doing these evil things. We're the ones who do those things. He says, that's why he says the greatness of the gift. Okay. Point number 2. There is great power in baptism to make and to create a new man. Page 152 at the bottom of the second column. For great indeed is the might of baptism. It makes them quite other men than they were that partake of the gift. It does not let the men be men and nothing more. Make thou the Gentile to believe that great is the might of the Spirit, that is, that it has new molded, that it has fashioned thee anew. Why waitest thou for the last gasp, like a runaway slave, like a malefactor, as though it were not thy duty to live unto God? Why dost thou stand affected to him, as if thou hadst in him a ruthless, cruel master? So there was this tendency in the 4th century. For example, St. Constantine the Great was baptized on his deathbed because there was a great fear that if I dared to sin after baptism, I was destined for eternal condemnation. And so there was an element in the church, not everybody by any means, but there were some that would put off their baptism because they wanted less and less chances of sinning after their baptism. And so Chrysostom is like, why are you putting off this great gift? Receive the gift. And now he's going to go here in this next point and say, look, the Christian life is not an impossible commandment from God, so long as you desire to live it. Yeah, if you don't really want to live it, you're going to see it as an impossible way of life. If you embrace the calling of God to live this new life that he's given you, it's by no means impossible. Look, page 153. First column, almost to the bottom. Do you see it there? It says, true say you, but I cannot keep the gift. Has God commanded impossibilities? Hence it is that all is clean reversed. Hence that all the world over, everything is marred, because nobody makes it his mark to live after God. So he's talking about those who don't even try to, they're not accepting the challenge, so to speak. They're not accepting the calling to live a life for God. He says, thus, those who are yet catechumens, meaning those who are not yet baptized, but believers, because they make this their object, how they may defer baptism to the last, give themselves no concern about leading an upright life. And those who have been baptized, whether it is because they received it as children, or whether it be that having received it in sickness and afterwards recovered, they had no hearty desire to live on to the glory of God, so it is that neither do these make an earnest business of it. Nay, even such as received it in health have little enough to show of any good impression, and warmly affected for the time. These also presently let the fire go out. So he's coming down pretty hard on these people who, you got the ones who are putting off baptism, and since they're not baptized yet, they're not worried about living a holy life because, well, I'll be forgiven and my baptism will take care of all those things. Then you have the ones, now remember, this is the year 400. Don't lose sight of that. For those who say that the church never baptized children, here in the year 400 he even says, in those who have received it as children. So we know for sure that at least as of 400, it had already become a long-standing practice in the church to baptize children, or whether it has received in sickness, and all of these other excuses people give to not even try to live their Christian life. Of course, if we're not trying, we're going to say God's asking us to do the impossible. And so he says, put away all those things. Live the life. And he talks, the rest of this sermon now is going to get into how we can maintain a proper perspective. So, point number 4. We should maintain the proper perspective on various lifestyle limitations. So now he's talking about, okay, what is the Christian way of life? And he says, this is on page 153, second column, about an inch of the way down. I do not part you from your wife. No, it is from fornication that I bar you. I do not debar you from the enjoyment of your wealth. No, but from covetousness and rapacity. I do not oblige you to empty out all your coffers. No, but to give some small matter according to your means to them that lack, your superfluities to their need, and not even this unrewarded. We do not urge you to fast. We do, but forbid you to besot yourselves with drunkenness and gormandizing. I'm not quite sure what that word means, to be honest. The things we would retrench are but the very things which bring you disgrace, things which even here on this side of hellfire you yourselves confess to be things to be shunned and hated. We do not forbid you to be glad and to rejoice. Nay, only rejoice not with a disgraceful and unbecoming merriment. What is it that you dread? Why are you afraid? Why do you tremble? Where marriage is, where enjoyment of wealth, where food in moderation, what matter of sin is there in these things? So he brings a beautiful point that these so-called limitations in the Christian life aren't as much limitations as the proper directing of these things. The proper place for joy and rejoicing, the proper place for a sexual relationship, the proper place for wealth, the proper place for fasting. Not to lose focus of where those things are important, right? So if you keep that proper perspective, Chrysostom is pointing out, then this way of life that Christ is calling us to is not going to be impossible. Would anyone say that it is impossible for a married man to remain faithful to his wife? It might be impossible to expect a man having no wife to remain celibate his entire life. That might be more impossible. But is it impossible to expect a married man to remain faithful to his wife? That's where Chrysostom is pointing to the difference of what these limitations of the Christian life are. All right, which is why even St. Paul would say it's better to marry than to fall into the sin of fornication. Right? And so, because even St. Paul recognized the great pressure, the great temptation that sexuality has on our human psyche, and so St. Paul says it's probably not safe for everyone to be celibate, and he even calls celibacy, is a gift. Not all are called to the celibate life. Only certain people are called to the celibate life. So, but all those things are possible if we have the proper perspective, is what Chrysostom is trying to point out here. I can't even keep track of all these comments. I'll have to read some of them later. But some people are having a conversation over there, so that's good. We'll let them talk for a little while. Okay. Time for our life application. Turn to page 154. And I wrote this sentence: it is better for us to live the Christian way of life in faith that God knows better than we do, rather than wasting time questioning why all these things are part of our life. Okay? So, page 154, Chrysostom gets into this talking about virtue. He says, let us set aside, the very top of the column, let us set about practicing virtue. Let us make a beginning. Let us only lay hold on it, and you shall see what the good will be. Right? Just begin the Christian life, a life of virtue, and you'll see why God has us doing these things. God has the knowledge. God knows better than we do, right? A little further down, about halfway through that column. Fear the uncertainty of the future. So remember we talked a couple weeks ago about how sometimes healthy fear can let us pay a little closer attention. Remember that kind of fear that Chrysostom talks about? So here he says, fear the uncertainty of the future. As a thief in the night, so death comes, and not merely as a thief, but while we sleep, it sets upon us and carries us off while we are idling. To this end has God made the future uncertain, that we may spend our time in the practice of virtue because of the uncertainty of expectation. Well, that was the message of Holy Week. The message of Holy Week was, be ready. We don't know when Christ is returning. Or we don't know when we're going to Him. So Chrysostom is saying, fear that uncertainty. Allow that fear of not knowing when the end will come. Allow that to generate your zeal to live that holy life. To live constantly prepared, to live always ready for that moment that you're going to be face to face with God. That was the message of Holy Week. That was, all those bridegroom services. Behold, the bridegroom comes in the middle of the night. Blessed is he whom the Lord finds being vigilant. Right? Don't become idle. Don't become one of the the foolish virgins who didn't have enough oil for their lanterns. They were not prepared when the Lord came, right? That's the message of Holy Week. That's what Chrysostom is saying. Allow that fear of the unknown to churn up for you the desire to live that life. Because once you have the desire, the impossibility goes away. Do you see how this is working back and forth for Chrysostom? Then the final thing he says here on the next column, almost right in the middle, page 154. The proper solution of such questions is faith. He goes on to all these questions people are having about the faith. The proper solution of such questions is faith. The knowing that God does all things justly and mercifully and for the best. And to comprehend the reason of them is impossible. Sometimes we just have to have faith that God knows what He's doing. Okay? There's a question here. So will the second coming be scary and dark? I think that's a good question, John. The second coming, as we talk about in the Scripture, will be an awesome and, for those who are not prepared, a frightening experience. I think the imagery of coming in the dark is more of an image of, we in the darkness is when we're not paying attention. In the daytime, we're at work, in other words, we're paying attention to what's going on around us. The darkness comes, we go to sleep, and we feel somehow nothing is going to go on around us. That's the imagery there. I mean, we don't know when God's going to come at high noon, for that matter.
In a way, no one knows the day or the hour, so the day
Right.
would be kind of classified as sunlight, right?
Well, yeah, but it could be any time. But let's face it. When He returns, the entire world will know at once, at the same time, that He's returning. So, inevitably, someone in the world will be at midnight when He returns. And so the church has that imagery. As a matter of fact, that is the daily prayer at the monastery at midnight is recalling the return of Christ, who's going to come as a thief in the night. Not necessarily when we are at midnight, but in that image of when we think we're comfortably asleep and nothing's going to happen, at that moment of that lullness, of that idleness, as Chrysostom used the word, that's when, when we, as we say, when you least expect it, expect it.
In general,
Use your microphone.
in general, when we say prepared, in a nutshell, what are we saying?
Be ready.
Be ready.
Be ready. Don't leave anything undone. Don't leave any sin unrepented. Don't leave any relationship unmended. Don't put off for tomorrow, spiritually speaking, what needs to be done and accomplished today. Yeah. Obviously, you can say, I can paint that room tomorrow. We're not talking about painting the house. We're talking about getting our eternal soul ready to greet the Lord. Yeah. All right. I could just go on and on and on. We're already 7 minutes over time, so we're gonna have to call it a night. I want to thank everyone for chiming in. We had quite the discussion this evening, and online too. Quite a bit of comments coming in online. This one person is really trying to cause trouble, and I'll. Well, some of the people were responding to this person too, so they had their own little conversation online. But I want to thank those of you who were able to join us this evening for our live stream Bible study. Remember that if you've missed any of the weeks, this was session 24. You can view any of the sessions either on the Orthodox Christian Network at myocn.net. Press the watch button and go to Be Transfigured, or on my website at liveanewlifeinchrist.org. And Joyce, don't forget to log on tonight and let us know your name and address so we can get you your cross. A couple of thank yous. Those of you who are finally becoming comfortable with the microphones in front of you and not pushing them away, thank you very much. Thank you to the Orthodox Christian Network for presenting our Bible study live on the internet this evening. Thank you to the parish for sponsoring. Thank you also to those of you who are participating with us online. Until next week, God bless you. Don't forget to live a new life in Christ. and most importantly, celebrate the resurrection of our Lord and God and Savior Jesus Christ. Christ is risen.
revealing thy glory to thy disciples as far as they could bear it. Let thine everlasting light shine upon us sinners, through the prayers of the Theotokos, O giver of light, glory to thee.
Be Transfigured is a production of the Transfiguration of Our Savior Greek Orthodox Church in Florence, South Carolina, and presented by the Orthodox Christian Network. Contributions in support of this ministry may be sent to Be Transfigured, 2990 South Cashua Drive, Florence, South Carolina 29501, or online at our website at www.liveanewlifeinchrist.org.
Thou